everyone. Welcome to a new podcast from the Belt and Road Institute in Sweden. My name is Hussein Askary. Today is Saturday, the 21st of June, 2025. Today's webcast is very special given the situation between Israel and Iran following the illegal aggression by Israel against Iran last Thursday, June the 12th. And the ramifications of that attack, and also what is behind it in the larger picture, not simply what the Israel's goals are, but the goals of those who are behind Israel in the larger global picture. We had planned to have this podcast to discuss the extraordinary Trilateral Summit, which took place in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, on May 27th between China, the ASEAN countries, that is the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, and the Gulf Cooperation Council. This was an extraordinary summit, which was a sign of the times of a shifting global economic and political order. That was before the attack by Israel on Iran. We will have a special guest. We will discuss that summit. We will have a special guest from Malaysia, Mr. Bunn Nagara. He's the director of the Belt and Road Initiative Pacific Caucus, and he will join us soon. But first of all, I would like to express some of the views we have on the reasons behind the targeting of Iran beyond what is being discussed generally, which is Iran's nuclear program and whether Iran is close to producing a nuclear weapon or not. So we will come back to that question. It is very clear that at least since 2003, Iran had no intention of producing a nuclear weapon. Its nuclear program is completely civilian. This has been proven not only by the International Atomic Energy Organization, but by the United States intelligence community itself. Since that time until now, until 2 weeks ago, the US intelligence community, their opinion and their assessment has been that Iran was not building a nuclear bomb. This was expressed 2 weeks ago by the Director of National Intelligence of the United States in front of Congress, Tulsi Gabbard, and she said that Iran has no intention to build a nuclear bomb. This is the assessment not of herself, but all the American intelligence agencies, and this goes back a very long time. One way of assuring that Iran never acquires a nuclear weapon was through the JCPOA, the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, an agreement which was reached by Iran and the 5+1, the 5 Security Council members and Germany in 2015. It took 7 years to reach that agreement, and it assured that Iran, while it can keep its civilian nuclear program, will never be able to produce a nuclear weapon because there will be international observers inside every Iranian nuclear facility, assuring that Iran does not produce a nuclear weapon. That agreement was canceled by nobody other than President Donald Trump when he became president in 2016. So if there's any problem, it's him to blame if Iran ever acquires a nuclear weapon, although his intelligence agencies are telling him Iran is not about to acquire a nuclear weapon. And this is now President Trump says that the American intelligence agencies don't know what they're talking about, which is a bit funny in a way. So the issue is what if Iran is not close to building a nuclear bomb? What are the real reasons for that? The Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, he has his own goals. The so-called Zionist movement has its own goals. Both the Israeli Zionists and the American Christian Zionists have their own goals, which are biblical prophecies and so on and so forth. And Netanyahu wants to make sure that the original plan handed over to him more than 20 years ago, it's called the clean break and securing the realm, is to make sure that there is no other power in the region, so-called Middle East, in West Asia, other than Israel. So all other nations, all these major nations like Egypt, Syria, Iran, and so on and so forth, they must be weakened and ruined, and Iraq, of course, so that Israel remains on top and is secure. Now, ironically, that has not made Israel a secure country, as we can see today. So, but this level of thinking is not what the major strategists at a different level think about, and we call them Anglo-American elite, or the people who are behind or want to keep the unipolar world. Then the unipolar world is that the United States and Britain will control the world, and their financial and economic and military interests will be supreme above all other goals of other nations. Now, this is a utopian dream, but it's a very dangerous dream, because the United States is still the world's largest military power, and it can wreak havoc around the world. And the intelligence services of the United States and Britain and Israel and others are powerful enough to create chaos. They cannot win wars, but they can create chaos, as we saw in Iraq, Syria, Libya, Afghanistan, and other places. There is no peace and security there. But the idea is to keep these areas in chaos so other powers don't dominate. And these other powers are, of course, is that Russia, China, and their allies in the global south. Now, this is what really is behind this whole escalation. From the standpoint of the real big strategists in the United States and Britain and some parts of Europe, is to make sure that there is no new world order, that the multilateral world order, where nations like China, India, Russia, and others in the global south have no seat at the table of global governance, that there will be only the unipolar world deciding for other nations how to live, what level of economic development and technological development is there for them. And this is where really the issue is. Iran, and this is what we want to discuss now, has become a key element in the new world multilateral economic order. It has, for many reasons, despite all the 800 types of sanctions imposed on it for 40 years, it has managed to keep a certain stable economic situation, is building infrastructure and integrating its infrastructure and economy with other nations in the global south. Now, Iran is a key element of the Belt and Road Initiative. And many people now are saying the real goal of the attack on Iran is to destroy the Belt and Road Initiative. But not only that, Iran is a key part now of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which is a Eurasian security and also economic constellation. Iran became a member of the BRICS nations, together with the United Arab Emirates, Egypt, Ethiopia, and also now Indonesia. And there are many other nations who are looking forward to become members of the BRICS. And Iran is, of course, has a pivotal geographical location on the Belt and Road Initiative and the Belt and Road corridors, both the land-based corridor, which I will discuss now, and also the maritime Silk Road, but also on what is considered as an alternative to the Belt and Road by India, which is the Russia, Iran, India, north-south international transport corridor, which goes from Russia through the Caspian Sea to the northern ports in Iran, like the Bandar Anzali. I was there myself as late as last May. I have seen the enormous advanced infrastructure being built there, but also on the eastern part of the Caspian Sea to Bandar Abbas on the Gulf, but also to Chabahar, close to the Pakistani border, and then further to India. That's why Iran has a geographical pivotal role, but also economic role in the whole constellation of what we call the global South. Uh, I, I have followed this development for many years. The first article I wrote was in 1996 for the American magazine Executive Intelligence Review, when President Hashemi Rafsanjani, the Iranian president at the time, inaugurated a small railway section between Mashhad in eastern Iran and Saras in Turkmenistan, connecting that part of Asia to West Asia. And then 1 year later, another railway was built from Tabriz in northwestern Iran to the border with Turkey. This was the first big Silk Road article I wrote, and it became also part of the first ever new Silk Road comprehensive report published by the Executive Intelligence Review and the Schiller Institute in 1997. So these developments, and Iran's geographical is adjacent to 9 countries: it's Central Asia, Pakistan, and the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, Turkey, Iraq, the Gulf, the Arabian Sea, the Indian Ocean, and so on and so forth. So Iran has a pivotal role in all these different constellations. Iran has also a huge oil and natural gas reserve, which it shares with Qatar. Part of it was bombed recently by the Israelis. So Iran, as a key component of the whole situation in the Gulf region, in West Asia, is a very important part of this whole constellation. One very interesting event which took place just about 1 week or more before the Israelis attacked Iran was that the first train, the railway line between China and Xi'an in northwest China, arrived in Arpi logistics hub in northern Iran. That this will be a new line of transport on the new Silk Road, the Belt and Road, which is part of the China, Central Asia, West Asia corridor, which we can see now in this animation, which we have created a few years ago, and it's still valid. It's one of the most important corridors, the 6 main corridors of the Belt and Road Initiative. But this train, which arrives in Iran recently, is symbolic, and many people say now this could be a trigger for the Israeli attack. I don't know if that's true or not, but this is just a symbolic aspect of that. But what is important in this whole picture is that China has been playing a bigger and bigger role in this whole region. After the defeat of the United States and NATO in Afghanistan and the very humiliating withdrawal from Afghanistan in August 2021, which I have written about, that you have now what is called in British geopolitics the pivot of Asia, the pivot of Eurasia, which is Afghanistan and Central Asia. This is getting out of the control of the British and Americans for the first time in more than 200 years, since the Great Game started. And therefore you have a vacuum which was filled by China. Actually, China has a very good relationship with the Taliban, and there are lots of investments in Afghanistan. Central Asian nations and Russia are also building very constructive relations with Afghanistan. And therefore this whole center, this pivot of Eurasia, which the British wanted to keep unstable, was out of the game plan, so to speak. China also managed to get Iran and Saudi Arabia, who were entangled in a very dangerous and bloody proxy war in the region, which is the so-called Shia-Sunni divide. China managed to get the 2 countries to normalize relations in March 2023. And ending like 6-7 years of really terrible, 9 years of terrible destabilization of the whole region. one of the results, because of the war in Syria, we had the problems in Lebanon, and the war in Yemen, which the Saudis and the United Arab Emirates finally realized they cannot win. And therefore, the normalization between Saudi Arabia and Iran was very important. A few weeks before that agreement in March 2023, President Xi Jinping was in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, holding three major summits, one with the Saudi king and crown prince, one with the GCC, the Gulf Cooperation Council, and one with all the Arab countries. And this was a major breakthrough in relations, both diplomatically, but also in terms of economic relations between China and the Arab countries. A comprehensive strategic agreement was signed with Saudi Arabia, but President Xi Jinping offered a large number of cooperation areas, like not only infrastructure, hard infrastructure, digital infrastructure, cloud computing, space technology, and nuclear technology, besides all the clean technology and other things. The Gulf countries, they want to diversify their economies now. They don't want to be reliant on the oil price, which keeps fluctuating, going up and down dramatically, putting them in dire economic and financial straits the whole time. And therefore, Saudi Arabia, the Arab Emirates, even Kuwait and other countries want to industrialize. They want to use their sovereign wealth funds to invest in industries. But to have industries, you need to invest in infrastructure, which is transport, power, telecommunications, and so on. And China is generous enough to offer all these things to the countries. 2 months later, in February 2023, the Iranian president Ibrahim Raisi, visited China and signed or finalized a comprehensive strategic agreement with China for 25 years. And this is one of the most comprehensive agreements ever signed between Iran and China. Iran's relationship usually is naturally with the West, but because their relationship to Russia has been troublesome historically, but also to Asia, they didn't have so much connection to Asia. So these agreements between the Arab countries and China, and Iran and China, and the normalization of relations between Iran and Saudi Arabia was ushering a new era in the whole region's economic and political situation. Now, you remember in 2023, a few months after these developments, President Joe Biden announced from Indonesia during the G20 summit an agreement to build what is called the India Middle East EU corridor as a rival to the Belt and Road Initiative. I wrote at that time about this, that this is political fiction. It's a political project. It's meant to undermine the Belt and Road, but without building any real alternative to the Belt and Road. There will be no railways, there will be no ports, because all the railways and ports are already being built by China and these countries in cooperation with them. So if you want to build something, you have to involve China in this. So therefore I said this was a political fraud, which is meant to derail the whole work which China has been preparing with these countries. In September, Benjamin Netanyahu spoke at the United Nations General Assembly, and he presented a map of the region where in green you had Israel and some Arab countries who were, according to him, willing to normalize relations with Israel, and then the rest was in outside. And there was no map of Palestine. There was nothing about Palestine in that map. There will be Israel and the Arab countries. Iran, Iraq, Syria, Lebanon are also left out of that picture. A year later, he presented the same map, but now he had, after the genocidal war was launched in Gaza, he presented a new map where he has the India, Middle East, EU plan, and he called it the blessing, that this is the new blessing in the region, and then the rest is the curse, which includes Iran, Syria, Lebanon, and Iraq. And all these four countries, except for Iran, has been destroyed or under control of the Anglo-American elites and also of Israel. Actually, Iraq is controlled by the United States because all the oil export money is kept in the United States in the Federal Reserve, and the American president keeps that money under the Executive Order 13303, which I have written a lot about. I have discussed this in interviews. So the only one which is left in this black curse is Iran. And therefore, this whole issue now is developing around the problem with the, trying to stop the Belt and Road Initiative, trying to stop the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which many nations like Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and others want to join, even Turkey, and also the developments around the BRICS nations, and so on and so forth. There's a new world economic order is emerging out of it, but because of the West Asia, Iran and the Gulf countries and Palestine, Syria are so crucial geographically and strategically that this area have become the battleground for the whole situation. So I believe that this is now the reason, the true reason for the strategists beyond Netanyahu, beyond Trump and the Zionists, that the strategists at the level of people like Tony Blair, for example, and the London and Wall Street financial oligarchy and what people call the military-industrial complex, this is what they are thinking about. This is how important it is to defeat Iran. And the plan is to do a regime change in Iran as a key element in coming back to this pivot of Eurasia, and also to implement plans like the Bernard Lewis plan to divide all these countries, but especially Iran, into ethnic entities. That Iran will be divided into 4 or 5 different, Persian, Azeri, Arab, Kurdish, Baluch groups. And then from there, you move to Pakistan, Central Asia. There are plans to conquer and divide Russia in ethnic and lines. There are many people in the West who have been talking about carving Russia, splitting it into smaller pieces, and then China is the big prize. So China will be the final goal of this whole regime change process, which started after 9/11. And whether Russia and China now will intervene to stop that, we don't know. How much they are trying to use diplomatic ways, talking to Trump, talking to the Europeans to find a solution to this madness. But this is where things are going. And therefore, people predict that the whole situation in the Middle East and also in Ukraine will develop into a global war, a global thermonuclear war. So this is the background, which we believe is the reality behind the situation. And as I said, our intention was to have a discussion about this extraordinary summit, which falls into the same framework we are discussing. There's a new constellation of economic and political forces coming together in the global south, and the idea of discussing the extraordinary summit in Kuala Lumpur in Malaysia in late May between China, the ASEAN, and the Gulf Cooperation Council. And therefore, I would like to welcome our guest, Mr. Bunn Nagara from the Belt and Road Initiative Pacific Caucus in Kuala Lumpur, who is joining us today. We are very happy to have you with us today. Originally, we were supposed to discuss this extraordinary trilateral summit which took place in Kuala Lumpur, where you are, between China, the ASEAN countries, Association of Southeast Asian Nations, and the Gulf Cooperation Council. It was a very extraordinary summit with all these 3 elements. But since we have this situation developing between Israel and Iran, we had to take up this anyway. First of all, I would like to ask your view from your perspective in Malaysia, you yourself, but also the people around you. I know Malaysia had a very strong position on the genocide taking place in Gaza. So please let me know what your thinking is.
Well, there are mixed views within Southeast Asia itself, and definitely in Malaysia, at the level of officials, there is no doubt that this situation now between Iran and Israel is highly dangerous. It can, explode into just about anything, not just a regional war, but possibly even a world war. The defense minister of Malaysia, only within the last 24 to 48 hours, mentioned exactly this, that there is no telling how far this will go, and from every indication that we have, it's going down anyway. It's only a matter of how deep. So my personal view is that it is very worrying indeed. It could go all out to be a third world war. I think that's the nearest we've come to ever since the Second World War today. The situation in Ukraine has not been settled. Situation in Gaza has not been settled either. And now we have this with highly explosive implications. And nobody can tell when we reach that point where there is no return, because no country, including the US, can retrieve the situation once it passes that point. And we are nearing that right now. And there's no telling how far and how fast this will develop in all the wrong directions for all the wrong reasons.
Yeah, this is quite serious what we are discussing. I think this is shared by many people, around the world. I mean, I listen also to people, analysts, former military, former intelligence experts from the United States, and they say this could very rapidly evolve into not only a regional war, but into a global war, because we don't know how Russia and China will react if Iran is attacked by the United States. There have been warnings, but also, soft warnings. But we don't know. Iran has, comprehensive strategic agreements with both Russia and China, but it does not include military, joint defense agreements. But we don't know how this will evolve. And as you said, the United States, like in Ukraine, this idea of peace through strength, which Trump was pushing, obviously does not work, because could not achieve peace in Ukraine in 24 hours, could not end the killing in Gaza, and now he didn't reach an agreement with Iran. So this is really a very, very bad situation. Now, if we suppose that diplomacy and the cooler heads will intervene and we will have diplomatic solution to this situation, what we have already evolving is this new world order. We have the nations of the global south working together to establish new economic, trade, financial structures, which serve their interest, not the interest of the unipolar world. And this recent summit in Kuala Lumpur was really extraordinary, where we had the ASEAN, the GCC, and the China meeting together. They issued a joint declaration. But first of all, for people who don't really understand what is the ASEAN and why it is so important, if you can explain for people.
Well, Southeast Asia has been a region which has been colonized for a long time, and with the possible exception of Thailand. Now, upon gaining independence around the middle of the 20th century, all the countries in Southeast Asia felt a need to come together to protect their own collective interests, their shared interests, in a way that sustains their sense of sovereignty. That independence should mean more than just something in name. They achieved political independence, but even after that, they remain economically tied to their former colonial powers. So, in order to achieve full independence, all the countries at least implicitly realized that they have to achieve full economic independence as well, which means, in practice, being able to trade as well as seek investment from any country they wish. Southeast Asia, upon gaining independence, was not in a position to align themselves with any superpower. The days of colonialism were over for them, and to be aligned with any major power is to return to neo-colonialism, which is unacceptable. So initially, in the early 1960s, there was the effort to form ASA, the Association of Southeast Asia, which consisted of Thailand, Malaysia, and the Philippines. And then that didn't work out. And then later, soon enough, there was the Mafilindo, uh, Malaysia or Malaya, Philippines, Indonesia. Again, that didn't work, partly because, well, there was the suspicion on the Malaysian part that Mafilindo was an attempt to forestall the formation of Malaysia. Malaya, it consisted of the Malay states on the Malay Peninsula, and then Malaysia was formed in 1963, involving Sabah and Sarawak on Borneo as well as Singapore. Brunei initially wanted or it considered joining, but then it changed its mind. Malaysia itself resulted in the departure of Singapore in 1965, and the region was still in a kind of difficulty in terms of inter-border and bilateral issues dating back to history.
Yeah, and it's also it was during the Cold War period. You have the Vietnam War going on. We had the attack on Cambodia. Thailand was basically under American influence.
The U.S. had military bases in the Philippines and Thailand, right? And in 1954, there was the early attempt by the U.S. to form a regional association that was part of the Cold War on the side of the U.S. This was called SEATO, the Southeast Asia Treaty Organization. Now, this was a misnomer from the start because out of the 8 countries that were members of SEATO, only 2 were actually from Southeast Asia. The others consisted of the US, Western countries, Pakistan, even that at that time was an ally of the US. And this didn't sit well with the other countries like Malaysia or Malaya at that time, Indonesia, and so on, which did not have any foreign military bases other than in Malaya's part, British bases that were followed on from the colonial era that was about to leave as well, following the pullout of British forces, following the independence of Malaya. So anyway, SEATO did not do well. It had disbanded in the 1970s, and it was not popular even among the members themselves because it had become irrelevant and redundant. So to form a genuine regional organization made up of sovereign nations with full rights and responsibilities in forming their own decisions, ASEAN came about in 1967. Now, there is a common misperception that ASEAN was like SEATO, that it was a pro-West or pro-US organization. But that was never an issue from the start. This is a misperception because the real issue of security, which was at the core of the purpose of forming ASEAN, was to make sure that the region was safe and secure, in particular from the kinds of bilateral problems that countries had at the time. Issues like, border issues, rival claims to territory, which exist until today, and they have not been fully resolved, but they have been moderated and limited by ASEAN. It is difficult to imagine that Southeast Asia today without ASEAN, because many, bilateral problems still exist. And recently, and even now, as you know, there's a problem between Cambodia and Thailand. So this goes back to prehistory. Of course, the colonial period did not help. If anything, it actually deepened the divisions and exploited the differences through the system of divide and rule. Now we have ASEAN, which has helped to limit and moderate the differences we have between countries. Geographically, Malaysia for a long time has been at the center of the ASEAN countries and sharing borders with most of the other countries, if not all of them. So as a result, there have been issues even now, between Malaysia and its neighbors. But ASEAN has helped to limit the implications from that. So ASEAN is now struggling with a wider world which very much is beyond his control when it comes to Cold War politics or geostrategic issues created by the major powers. It has been trying, as always, to strive for a middle path, to be friends to all and enemies of none, in order to, and affirm the regional sovereignty and independence of the member countries.
Yeah, and
So
they have done quite well in terms of having a peaceful period now for how many decades, 3 to 4 decades, and even more.
Yes.
Although
Yes.
as you say, there are many, bilateral and border issues, like many other parts of the world which were colonized before. The British always left these landmines everywhere, where nations can fight each other. But also, I mean, you have the big neighbor, China, with whom the ASEAN countries, some ASEAN countries also have border issues, the South China Sea issues as well. But you manage to keep cool heads, and you have a philosophy of resolving conflicts in a very special way, which I think the rest of the world needs. Each nation, they have their, and what they consider their historical rights and, territorial issues, but then it never gets to the level of conflict or armed conflict. So it seems that you have focused on the question of economic development and trade, and of course, people to people, because many of the countries. I was in Malaysia last year. Malaysia is like truly a mixture of many Asian nations. But you can still live in harmony. You have Malay, you have Muslims, Chinese, Indian, all kinds of ethnic groups and religious groups, but you keep this harmony. And I think this is quite fascinating and worth, studying for other parts of the world, like the Middle East, the so-called Middle East and West Asia. But anyway, if we talk about the economic rise of the ASEAN, because this is really a fascinating story. I mean, there was a setback with the 1997 crisis of the Asian tigers, but then you recovered from that, and now you are a major part of the global industrial supply chains. And can you tell us a little bit about that economic aspect of the rise of ASEAN?
Well, this is, refers to a model of development that some call the flying geese model. I think there is much in that, because as far as East Asia is concerned, and I consider East Asia to be a combination of both Northeast Asia and Southeast Asia. And with Northeast Asia, it started with the immediate post-Second World War years of the rise of Japan. Japan showed the way in which an Asian country devastated by war could rise very quickly based on its economic growth. It was successful, and then it had its limits, of course, because of its size and so on. And then it was shut down through the Plaza Accord, through the devaluation of the dollar and so on. Because if you remember, as far as the 1980s is concerned, Japan was seen as a threat by the US, even though now it's considered an ally. Well, it has been tamed. Its economy has been limited, and I don't think the heyday of the Japanese economy will return. It has been struck down. But following Japan, there was the NIEs, newly industrializing economies, which included, Taiwan, Hong Kong, Singapore, South Korea. And following from that, a number of ASEAN countries came up, also developed very rapidly based on industrialization and, of course, import substitution. Now, the big example of the East Asian development is China itself. The mainland has rapidly developed, and for a country that size, the speed of development is amazing in both economics as well as technology and many other areas. So this is all part of East Asian development. When people see the rise of China, they look at it as only one country, but really it is about the whole region. And China is only the biggest and the most recent example of this. So there is a lot of symmetry as well as synergy within the region. It is a tide that lifts all boats in East Asia. Some countries may develop faster, some slower, some may gain more, some gain less, but we all gain and we all develop. And that is most important, because nobody is losing out. and nobody wants anything that is to reverse the trend now. So as far as trade and the investment are concerned, this is seen in this region as the core of sovereignty. We want to trade with anyone we want, and we want to invest and see investments from anyone we want. We don't want to be dictated to by any major power, and any country or power that threatens this will immediately be seen as a threat, if not also an enemy, because that is an affront to our sovereignty. That denies our abilities and our rights as a sovereign nation. So this is something that is very much a part of East Asian development, and the rise of East Asia in particular, I think, can be seen in terms of that. We
Yeah,
are
there is
not
a
ideological,
yeah.
you
There is
know.
one thing which people don't understand in the West. It pertains to China because they think China is a producer of cheap goods and so on, and that it will continue forever being a producer of cheap goods. If we don't want Chinese, we can go to Southeast Asia and produce cheap goods there. But the
Mm,
economic development in Southeast Asia, I saw Malaysia itself, the infrastructure, the industrial capacity, the technological progress, the education level, the healthcare level, everything is top modern. It's even, in certain ways surpasses what we have in Europe. There are some edge technologies which we still have some control in Europe and the United States, but these cutting edge technologies, but Southeast Asia and China are now in the high tech uh, region, and they are not dependent so much as before on the markets in the West because China and Southeast Asia are the largest economic partners together. I think the ASEAN 2 years ago, they surpassed both the United States and the EU in the volume of trade with China. I think it's almost $1 trillion now.
yes.
And it's not only cheap goods, it's all kinds of industrial goods and investments, which are
Mm,
quite important. But you also have the regional comprehensive, the RCEP, which
yeah.
now includes Australia, South Korea, New Zealand, and Japan, because those countries are also interested in being part of this dynamic market in the region. And the RCEP is the world's largest free trade economic zone. And it's interesting that with this the US tariffs policy and the EU decoupling policy, it seems that this region will become completely independent.
Well, the so-called decoupling policy is a self-defeating policy from the start, and it can be nothing more than self-defeating, because in other regions, in particular East Asia, and if you consider even in the South Pacific, including Australia and New Zealand, our economies are integrating. That is a natural trend. Individually, as national economies, we are growing, and then that is within the context of regional integration. It is something that no country can stop. Nobody in this region wants to stop. And it is something that is a natural and positive growth that helps everyone in this region. So this is something that has to be learned from rather than to be jealous of. I think a lot of other countries, even the so-called developed world, can learn from some of this. At the core is a policy of pragmatism. We are not ideological. We do not go into all these so-called tussles of big powers, which are a waste of time and resources. And we really concentrate on what's needed to serve society and the national interest. And because our national interest in this region align, we can work together much more closely. It also helps to have enlightened leaders. So, at the base, national leaders understand what's at stake, and therefore they do what is practical and pragmatic, and then forget about the rest of the world, which wants to turn away or wants to have conflict over nothing that is totally self-defeating.
Yeah, we will soon come to the question of the relationship between ASEAN, China, and the Gulf Cooperation Council and the connection, both historical and current connection. But I would like to share, because we come to this question of the Belt and Road Initiative plays a key role in this relationship. I would like just to play a short animation which we produced a couple of years ago about the six major Belt and Road corridors, but one of them is, of course, we'll show it now. This one is the China, Indo-China or Southeast Asia corridor. And it's being built currently. I would like to ask you, of course, for to explain a bit more.
As far as the BRI is concerned, it comes at a very welcome time for East Asia in particular. This is nothing really new to our region because, long before the colonial period, centuries ago, traders from all over the world came to Southeast Asia to trade on their sailing ships mainly, and that makes Southeast Asia, in particular the Malay Peninsula, that is today's Malaysia and Singapore, a meeting point of cultures and traditions. Many of the traders stayed and settled in. That is what makes our region, and Malaysia in particular, a very multicultural country. It has been enriched by this experience. Now, in the 1960s, just a few years after independence for many countries in this region, the early 1960s saw a plan by the United Nations to have connectivity through infrastructure connecting the developing countries in the region. Unfortunately, it did not go very far because of a lack of resources, and governments were still in the process of building up their own societies post-independence. So it went on for a long time when infrastructure connectivity was lacking in our region. Then, ASEAN was formed in 1967. This need was again reviewed, but there was a lack of resources among the developing countries in Southeast Asia. Then there was an ASEAN Summit in Hanoi in 2010, which truly focused and emphasized on this, what was officially called the ASEAN Master Plan for Connectivity. The realities were recognized, the priorities were set, but again, infrastructure funding was lacking. But just 10 years after 2010, President Xi Jinping of China announced the Belt and Road Initiative in Kazakhstan. The following year, he announced it in Indonesia. And China had the resources to do it. He has a track record of building roads, highways, and even high-speed rail within China. And this was very impressive and much welcome in this region. As a result, the Belt and Road Initiative took off and was welcomed in the region, and we are building on it steadily. 2017 was the first summit or forum in China for the BRI. 2019 was the second one. Then there was a gap because of COVID lockdowns, and then we have continued with the third and coming on the fourth summits or forums as well. So this is something that grows. Malaysia has 3 leading projects currently in the BRI, but unfortunately, some projects that were not so successful were confused to be as part of the BRI when they were not. They were private sector projects, not government to government, not even infrastructure, but they lacked due diligence. But the G2G, government to government projects, particularly in infrastructure, and now increasingly in terms of people to people and values, in terms of the Global Development Initiative, Global Security Initiative, and the Global Civilizational Initiative, are continuing to develop. So that is what we look forward to, and the development of the BRI in all its full form in terms of the infrastructure hardware as well as the software of philosophy and people-to-people exchanges. This is something that is growing.
Right. There was you have in Malaysia the Eastern Railway. I think it's called the project.
East Coast Rail Link.
East
Coast Rail Link, or ECRL. Now that's ongoing and will be completed soon, with a proposal now seriously of linking it with Thailand as well to make it more economically viable. So we are connecting country to country.
Okay, and so also in Thailand, this year the parliament approved a plan to build a high-speed rail, also from the border to Laos and southward through Thailand, and then reaching Malaysia. But also in Laos already they have completed the China-Laos railway, which has created actually a very interesting economic activity in the whole country. Vietnam this year also approved a plan to connect to build a railway connecting to China. So this whole vision, which I showed earlier, is going to be a part. But also, I think the Mekong River itself, the hydropower potential, which is being utilized to produce hydropower and regulate the water flow and so on. I think this is but also there's a combination not only of railway and transport, but also industrial zones. Like in the Eastern Link, you are connecting not only cities, but you are connecting industrial zones. There are industrial parks being built along the road.
Yes.
Right.
As far as development is concerned, economic development of nations and regions, infrastructure is key. It is a multiplier factor. It helps development in all other ways by facilitating transportation of goods in imports and exports, as well as people in tourism. It also helps in urbanization of regions that are linked. So if we get the infrastructure built in a way that is, in the initial phases of development, then the other aspects of development will follow.
We have but we also have, as I showed in my introduction, the China-West Asia corridor, and which reaches the Gulf. But we have also the maritime Silk Road. Sorry.
Yes.
The maritime Silk Road and the relationship in the Indian Ocean between the Southeast Asian countries and the Arab countries historically is quite interesting, but now it is re-emerging with the Belt and Road, that this old maritime Silk Road is now, becoming a reality again. And as I explained, China and the Gulf countries have developed their relationship quite intensively and dramatically. I can just say a couple of things about the Gulf Cooperation Council, that it was established in the 1980s during the Iran-Iraq war to, in a certain way, to protect themselves as a group. And they were protected by the United States and Britain, the former colonial master. But then it became a bit of creating a separate club from Iraq, which is a Gulf country, and Iran, which is another Gulf country. But these two other countries were isolated from the rest of the Gulf. And there was, of course, some tension. But the significance of the Gulf Cooperation Council today is that they're many-fold, because traditionally the Gulf Cooperation Council, of course, had oil and gas exporters, but they could not use all the money they were getting from the exports. So they were investing their money in Europe, the United States, and Britain, and London, New York, financial and banking sector, real estate. But now, since the oil shocks we have seen in the previous years, these nations are now diversifying their income sources. Like Saudi Arabia is a good example. The United Arab Emirates, another example. They are industrializing. They are investing the revenues from the oil in industrial projects, in infrastructure. And they're doing that largely in cooperation with China. And the Gulf countries, of course, as I said, they have enormous financial power. They have around $4 to $5 trillion in the sovereign wealth funds. Now, part of that is being invested both in the Gulf, but also in China, in Asia, and in Africa, in real economic productive projects. So this is quite a revolutionary situation where the Gulf countries are leaving their previous position and, the stereotypical, the rich Arabs who have money, but they don't know what to do with them. Now they know what to do with the money. They are building their future. And also, of course, President Trump was there, and he's obsessed with money. And this whole discussion that the Gulf countries will invest $6 trillion, I have discussed this before, it's not true. It's not going to happen. This is a lot of trade, a lot of arms trade, which takes place anyway. And they count all of that as investment. There will be some investments by the Gulf countries in the United States, but they want some American technology, like, chip industries and others. But the United States and Europe, for example, they will never build nuclear power in Saudi Arabia. China and Russia are willing to do that. So there's a lot of hype about the Gulf countries investing in trumps United States. It's not true. The Gulf countries have focused on diversifying their sources of income and getting away from reliance on oil and gas. But the relationship with China is very clear. But I don't know the question of the ASEAN countries too is have a very important, of course, connection to the Gulf countries. And this summit, there was a final declaration, but I don't know if you have seen specific new elements in the relationship between the ASEAN countries with the Gulf Cooperation Council countries, and of course, China too.
Well, as you know, we had this recent series of summits at the occasion of the ASEAN summit itself. And this year, Malaysia being the chairman of ASEAN, we are hosting the usual 2 summits a year. The first one has been done, and the second one's coming in a few months' time. The first one was actually a combination of 3 summits in one. We have the ASEAN summit itself, then we have the ASEAN-GCC summit, which is the second, the first one being held in Riyadh 2 years ago. And then we also had at the same time in Kuala Lumpur this year, the first ASEAN-GCC-China Summit. Also, if you look at it in the context of Malaysian diplomacy, if you remember, there was the non-aligned movement's economic component in the G77. Malaysia is one of the countries in both the non-aligned movement and the G77, among a number of non-aligned member countries that wanted China to join the G77. Given China's proven economic strength as an example as well to other countries in the developing world in the G77. But China was hesitant, and so Malaysia was one of the co-founders of the G77 plus China. Now that is an ongoing group by itself, the G77 plus China. Then now we have the ASEAN Summit held in Malaysia together with the ASEAN-GCC and ASEAN-GCC-China Summit, which is also interesting geographically when, for example, people talk about the Asian century. Well, this effort is actually bringing the 2 ends of Asia together, West Asia in the GCC and East Asia, China in Northeast Asia and ASEAN in Southeast Asia. So we actually have a coming together of Asia from both ends. From West Asia, we have countries with immense resources, as you mentioned, finding a purpose perhaps in a more greater global context. And then we have China, a proven economic success on a massive scale. And then we have, of course, the ASEAN countries also. So this is an interesting development, which I think at the same time is also a natural development, because this is what Asia is moving into, whether or not there are policies behind it. But now there are policies behind this trend, and governments are fully aligned with this. And so we'll see how it goes. There will be further ASEAN-GCC and ASEAN-GCC-China summits to come. And so we have to see, how this progresses. To add another point, ASEAN chair, that is Malaysia now this year, will be a different country next year and the year after. But I think for an agreement and a decision like this, to have ASEAN-GCC and ASEAN-GCC-China summits regularly have been the consensual agreement of all ASEAN countries. It would not have happened in Kuala Lumpur this year without the consensus of all ASEAN countries. It is also a matter of consistency for Malaysia, because regardless of whoever is the prime minister or whichever political party is in office in Malaysia, this is the very consistent foreign policy of Malaysia going forward.
Yes, this is quite important, and also I think Malaysia has a very special place in the hearts and minds of people in the Arab world and the Muslim world, because of the principled positions we have taken before by Prime Minister Mahathir bin Mohamad and now Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim, very, very strongly principled position on the questions related to, for example, Palestine and the situation in Gaza. So I think Malaysia in a very good position to be the bridge between the Arab and Muslim world and East Asia. And I think this there's a cultural aspect which is very, very important to understand that the Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim, he has this view of the like a civilization initiative, which is called Tamaddun, the Tamaddun philosophy, which is that with the economic, scientific, technological progress, we need cultural, spiritual progress, but also a dialogue of civilization, a dialogue of cultures. And I think Malaysia is in a fantastic position because it itself embodies this harmony between cultures and religions, and also the combination of modern scientific, technological progress and spiritual, cultural progress.
Well, yes, this is something which is really a universal value, applicable anywhere, because multiculturalism reflects a very diverse world. It is the reality, and the best that the most and the best we can make of it, the better for all of us. Unfortunately, this is a philosophy that seems alien to the West. They are used to dominance of one over others, which is expressed very well in colonialism and neocolonialism, as well as imperialism that continues. So, unfortunately, we have seen countries like the UK and Germany officially turning away from multiculturalism, as a state government supported project. It's a reality that if you do not support it officially, then you tend to result in either ignoring it or working against it, which is to the detriment of your own society. We see this social breakdown in the US itself very clearly now. They do not aim for multiculturalism, they make no effort to build it, and therefore they see the kind of frittering away and dissolution of what is really a mixed society. If you do not recognize the merits and virtues of a mixed society in multiculturalism, then of course your society is doomed. And that also means that in foreign policy you do not accept multipolarity. Again, you are doomed internationally. You're not accepted by other countries because the world is multipolar, the world is diverse. Not recognizing a basic reality like that isn't going to help. In fact, it's going to be worse for any country, whether developed or developing. So in Southeast Asia, and certainly in East Asia as well, we see this recognition. It may be implicit, it may not always be explicitly stated, but I think we all recognize the reality, and therefore we work well on it to make the most of it for everyone.
Yes, well, that's very well said. I think if the situation now between Israel and Iran is resolved through a diplomatic process and it does not get out of control and we have probably a world war, we will need a lot of the wisdom which you express, which you people in Southeast Asia express, this idea of harmony and multilateralism and respect for others and the equality among nations is quite important for people to understand, so we can avoid all kinds of conflicts and reach a better world for everyone. Because we are here in Europe, we want to be part of a better world. People in the United States, I have many friends in the United States, they don't want to be this warrior society which wants to dominate the world. They want to be one among equals and think about the future of their children and grandchildren and their prosperity. So Bunn Nagara, thank you very, very much for joining us today and sharing with us your insights.
You're welcome. Thank you very much.
Thank you.